cut my biological kids out of my will after discovering they knew about my wife's affair. And now they're furious. I, 60M, know that title probably caught a lot of you, but it really isn't what it seems. This entire situation has been agonizing for me, both physically and mentally. I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll try and be as succinct as possible so as to not bore anyone with the details. So I've been married for 2 years to my wife Jen, 58F, with whom I am raising her son, 16M, with. Man, words can't describe how much I love that kid. I treat him fully as my own. He's such a nice boy, and I'm proud to say he gets on with me very well. I also have 2 children from a previous marriage, 30M and 27F, from my now ex-wife, 60F. Long story short, I've cut my bio son, 30M, and daughter, 27F, out of my will. They are to inherit nothing. I run a rather successful business and own a few houses which are worth a lot. I had always intended to pass that on to them. The business to my son and the houses split between my son and daughter. I know it's a bit morbid, because there's nothing really wrong with me health-wise, but I've always been open with that to them. To be honest, they both had a spoiled upbringing, so they had a head start in life, which is the complete opposite of how I grew up. Now if we wind the clocks back some 5 or so years ago, I was married to my now ex-wife. We had been married for 35 years. We did have our ups and downs, like any other marriage, but there was never any infidelity or anything. Well, long story short, I ended up coming home to find her in bed with another man. Of all the ways to find out your spouse is cheating on you, that was the one I did not expect. Not because of how disrespectful it was, because at that point, respect is out the window, but because of how stupid it was. I did a lot of late work at my office during that time, but surely they weren't that stupid? At that moment I was seething in rage and had to restrain myself from beating the shit out of that guy. I ended up divorcing her and keeping my distance from her. I needed a lot of therapy and support to get through that. My relationship with my bio kids was still great and they understood what I was going through. Or so I thought. It was only recently that when I went for a drink with my daughter, that she was all of a sudden quiet and not like her usual self. I asked her what was wrong and she said she was scared to tell me. I calmly reassured her that everything would be okay. She then proceeded to spill her guts and say that she and her brother knew about their mother's affair, but that their mother had begged them not to tell me that they knew. My son ended up agreeing with his mother and convinced my daughter that this would be best. So they knew their mother was having an affair but were afraid to tell me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her if she and her brother were angry at what their mother had done, and she said she was, but that they couldn't cope with this and that it wasn't their place to get involved. Well, by not telling me, they had involved themselves. I later had to confront my son over this. He hit me with the "it was to protect you" shtick. At that point I felt very empty and cold inside. He began apologizing too, but by that point, I think I had enough. I had come to terms with the fact that my bio kids are fully grown adults now and that this is how they've chosen to be. I'm not going to fully go no contact with my own kids. I can't bring myself to do that. But I don't want much of a relationship with them either. I had to sit down with them both and inform them that I'd cut them out of my will, and that stepson would be inheriting much of what they were going to get. This led them to have outbursts of which I myself didn't even experience when I caught their mother cheating. They accused me of being heartless and cruel. And how can I love my stepson more than them when he's not even really my kid? I told them both he's more of my own than either of you and left. My stepson is very bright and I am sure he could one day take over my business. He could pick any of the houses I own to raise his family with too, and do what he wants with the rest of the properties. My ex has been sending me messages calling me heartless too. I have to admit, I have thought about whether I went too far on this. Update. So I imagine many of you have been waiting for an update to my situation. There were so many comments to my original post that I basically gave up on reading them all, given that they unanimously agreed I was in fact the Now I imagine many will be pleased that I did take the advice on board. But before we get into that, there are a few things that I need to address. I saw a lot of comments referring to me as some sort of heartless monster, which couldn't be further from the truth. I also saw a lot of comments claiming that my ex-wife married me because I was rich and that I deserved to get cheated on to escape my abuse. Reading this really made me both confused and upset as to how people had just invented the idea that my ex-wife was in some sort of loveless abusive marriage and that she cheated on me to escape me. Honestly, it seemed to me that people were attempting to justify and defend her cheating. The characterization of her couldn't be further from the truth. The reason why I kept referring to my kids as spoiled is because they had a very different upbringing to myself. I'm from a working class background. My parents worked blue-collar jobs. It took me decades to acquire the wealth that I have. My ex-wife, on the other hand, was from a privileged background. Over the years, she's mismanaged her finances with reckless spending habits, whereas I've been very tight with my finances. It is really odd to me how people desperately wanted to frame her in some kind of way. Anyway, I cleared my mind and braced myself to meet my bio kids. Reading the comments made me realize that I had misplaced anger. My daughter had wanted to tell me from the get-go, but was manipulated into not doing so. Her gut reaction was to help me. I was full of so much anger that it was really just to hide the pain I was feeling. But it wasn't her fault. Honestly, I felt shame for how I hadn't considered how she felt. My son, on the other hand, he's always been a bit meek but also closer to his mother. Really, what she did to him was more awful if anything. When I met with my kids, they were very nervous and apologetic as to some of the things they had said in their outburst. I also apologized for my behavior. Honestly, at this moment we all began crying. Reddit. I'm not the kind of guy who cries, but I just could not help it. We hugged and embraced. Afterward, I felt drained but in a very calm sort of way, as if a weight was beginning to lift. I told them that my plan is to split my properties equally. So my stepson and my 2 bio kids will each have a property of their own. I will also leave a large sum to be split between my wife, stepson and bio kids. They seemed very happy with this but also very grateful. I know these days it's very hard to get a house. I feel for a lot of you kids wanting your own place. However, I did have to reaffirm that my business will go to my stepson. Now this caused a bit of a disagreement with my bio son, but I had to be no nonsense and explain it to my bio son. My bio son has always wanted to take over my business. Instead of working for me, he's been working in an adjacent industry. I feel if he had really wanted it, he would have worked for me instead. I love my son. I really do. But he's just not cut out for it. He's soft and not cutthroat. I don't think he'd really have the guts and grit to run my business. My stepson, on the other hand, not only is taking a real interest, but he's just got the personality for it. For example, my stepson is very loud and confident. He's always talking to people. He has a bit of an ego and arrogance problem, for sure, but he is so assured of himself. Whereas my bio son, he's quiet and a bit socially anxious. I can't see him walking into a room of people and negotiating. I had to tell my bio son in simple terms, you're just not cut out for it. He didn't argue against it. I think he just accepted it. I got a lot of shit for saying that I have a lot of love for my stepson. Now that a lot of my anger has lifted, it's still there but I'm trying to be mindful of it. I would say I don't love my stepson more than my bio kids. I would say that I love him equally as much. I will get shit for this. But what is so wrong with this? Love isn't about biological relations. I love my now wife and I haven't known her much longer than I know my stepson. I met him quite early into when I first began dating my now wife. My stepson calls me dad. So I think he really loves me like he would love a biological father who raised him. His bio dad was never in the picture. The other thing is, he is just so similar to how I was at his age, a lot more than my bio son. If I may add. To all those folks who said my stepson is using me, that's just not him. I know the kid. I see myself in him. He's a good kid and he respects me. Now the other major happening here is that a lot of the blame lies with my ex-wife. What she did to my kids was truly awful. I feel I misplaced a lot of anger because it would be easier to blame my kids than to revisit my anger towards my ex-wife. I wanted to tell myself that I had moved on from my anger towards her. But sometimes the best lies are the ones we tell ourselves. The truth is I hadn't. And now I had to confront this anger again. My daughter told me that for a long time. She had considered going no contact with her mother, but she had been too scared to do it. You see, she does rely on her mother a bit for financial support, so she felt trapped. I told my daughter there and then that I think no contact would help her, and if she wants to do this, I will unequivocally support her financially. I will pay for whatever therapy or other expenses she needs. My daughter agreed to this. I expect my ex is going to try and contact me about this, but she brought this upon herself. My bio son, on the other hand, is going to remain in contact with her, although he's expressed that he wants to limit contact with her, which is fine with me. I'm just glad that my daughter is going to be free of her mother. My bio kids have only met my wife a handful of times. I told them I want them to spend more time at our place and more time with my stepson. I hope they can treat my stepson as they would a bio brother. They said they would be happy to spend time with him. So folks, that is all I have to update. For the most part, things worked out quite well. I did take everyone's advice on board, but I would caution people to relax when they get comfortable calling people monsters and evil. People just assumed I was some evil narcissist who abuses everyone. Nobody really took time to consider I was just hurting. But regardless of all that noise, I admit I did a lot wrong.